Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, September 17th, 2021, and today we're going to be talking about the United States generic ballot for the 2022 midterm elections and how FiveThirtyEight points out that the best tool for predicting midterm elections does not show a Republican wave. Now, many Republicans are expecting 2022 to be this very good year for them, especially considering that President Joe Biden is now disapproved of on the national level. If you take a look at Biden's approval rating here, you will see that 3.1% more Americans disapprove of the president than they do approve. This is a major decrease in overall support that he has had over the past couple of months, and Democrats and Republicans seem to be estimating that at some point in time over the next coming months and over the next year that we will start to see the beginning of a red wave year that will end up with Republicans demolishing Democrats down the ballot in 2022. But so far, even with preliminary election data, we can get a general idea and understanding of what's happening across the nation. We can get a better understanding of how this race is going to go simply by what we know now. Now, obviously, it isn't a perfect science and does need to be recognized that there can be inaccuracies, and there have been inaccuracies, but we are working with what we have currently, and we will apply it to the best of our ability for the 2022 House of Representatives elections, and briefly talk about the Senate elections and what a model that was actually on the spouter's crystal ball tells us about the generic ballot so far. So looking at these numbers from the generic ballot, if you actually want to see here, they have calculated the numbers for the 2022 race. Now, you can find this on the standard generic ballot polling website, the same one that you used for 2018 and 2020 on FiveThirtyEight. But it shows the Democratic Party with a 2.6% advantage, a 3-point advantage across the United States. In 2020, they were up in the polls around 7% and ended up winning by around 3 points. But in 2018, the polling data actually underestimated the amount of Democratic support. So really, it just depends on the type of year that it is, but we can get something from what we know now as of September 17th, 2021. And we can explore that in this article. They talk about how the final generic ballot is actually pretty accurate when it comes down to the election results versus the polling data itself. It says here that from 2008 through 2018, the average error was just 1.3% versus the generic ballot polling data average on election day and the final results. 2020 actually had one of the very unusual types of swings, a 4.3% swing in favor of the right wing. But besides 2020, for the past decade, you have seen here that the generic ballot seems to have been pretty spot on. In midterm election years and normal election years, 2020, I really think that many pollsters missed the mark. But in 2016, it was actually surprisingly very, very accurate across the United States. And it says here that early polling data can also be very predictive of what we know about our generic ballot. It says that you need to understand how to interpret them and just pretty much what it says now. So we can see here that in 1982, through 2018, all of these midterm election cycles, they give us the early generic ballot polling data. So this is actually the polling as of September 16th. Today is the 17th, so we're about a day ahead of time. But regardless, they are showing us where the polls stood then versus the actual result. And obviously, there are some major swings. Some years ended up being much better for the incumbent party than before. In fact, right around this time period, 6 days ago in 2001, 9/11 occurred, and that completely shifted and changed the trajectory of the 2002 midterm elections and the 2004 presidential election. So when you take a look at that polling data and you see that the Democratic Party was ahead by 6.7%, I can tell you, number one, right now, pollsters probably did not ask this question out of respect, but they did ask the question of whether or not you approved of President George W. Bush. And his approval rating hit nearly 90% after 9/11. His approval rating was 89%. I can't even imagine that happening today. But looking at the numbers then, the Democratic Party was ahead. So keep that one in the back of your head as an understanding that the circumstances did change dramatically for that midterm election compared to a lot of the other ones, which were more standard, more traditional type of midterm years. But you can see here that there are some pretty accurate results. In 1986, it was only off by 2 points. In 1990, it was only off by 2 points. In 1982, it was off by 12% in favor of the Democratic Party. Polling data actually wasn't as accurate before the 21st century, so I would stick more so in the 21st century, but we can actually get a pretty good indication. Let's disregard 2002 for the sake of argument and for the sake of just understanding that that circumstance was very different. 2010, 2014 is what I would say Democrats should be cautious about right now, because they see that polling switch, and it's exactly what might happen in 2022, because the Democratic Party was only leading by 3 points, 2 points, 2010, 2014, and all of a sudden, Republicans ultimately shifted it. But in 2006 and 2018, in blue wave years, In off years for the Democratic Party, they actually were able to maintain their early generic ballot margin. I mean, you can see that the final results were only off by 0.1 in 2006 and 0.3 in 2018. The reason being, Democrats maintained their popularity. And if you're wondering why I'm not just assuming that 2022 will be like 2010 and 2014, is because we are in the middle of a pandemic. There are so many things impacting the approval rating of President Biden versus in 2010, 2014, Barack Obama had to deal with standard types of things that dealt with the president's approval rating. Right now, I mean, you're talking about much bigger circumstances that could completely change the way our electoral process works. You have new voting laws. You have no new voting restrictions. You have a number of things being debated in the Supreme Court. You have the issues that many Democrats now view as a very important one for 2022. Obviously, COVID-19 was not an important issue in 2010 or 2014 to a point where people had to vote in different ways and had to go attend work, and lockdowns were occurring and mask mandates were a thing. Pretty much 2022 will not be very similar, I would say, to many other years. But I can say that just as a warning, if 2022 was to follow historical expectation, it would go to the GOP, and it would shift dramatically from now versus then. Because this is nearly a repeat of what we saw in 2010 and 2014. Democrats are lucky that it doesn't seem to be the same type of year. But the point is that if, let's say, for instance, we extrapolate this, go fully on out into November 2022, and the Democratic Party still maintains a lead that they currently have. Let's say they maintain a 2.6% lead on Election Day. That would be a good margin. I don't think that's something that the Democratic Party would be exactly excited about right now, which nor they should be. But I will say that if they are leading in the generic ballot, it does tell us a little bit about how the results might go. And that brings me to my next point. There's a political forecast here from the Center for Politics, Sabato's crystal ball. Now, they didn't make this. This actually came from, I believe, a professor at Emory University. Actually, yes, an Emory University professor. He released these results where he took a look at the former election results of midterm elections and compared them to the generic ballot and estimated how Democrats might need to perform in order to win in 2022, in order to expand seats. And you can see here that, let's see if we can go ahead and find the exact one that I wanted to show you, that at this point in time, if Democrats were to win the generic ballot, for instance, by 5 points, they would still lose 7 House seats. Democrats only can afford to lose 1, 2, or 3 seats. When you go to 4 to 5, that begins to put it in Republican majority territory, depending on incumbents that choose to vacate their seats halfway through their term. Essentially speaking, Democrats can't afford to lose any seats. And even if they win the generic ballot by 5 points, for reference, they won it by 3 points in 2020, they will lose 7 seats in the House of Representatives, ultimately flipping control to the GOP. But you can see here that losing 7 seats wouldn't be the worst scenario for the Democrats. In 2010, they lost 63 seats. In 2014, they went down to just 188 seats. Today, Democrats stand at 220. So Democrats have not necessarily a very large amount of seats, but they have enough to say that they are potentially able to hold on to a very significant portion of those seats in 2022. But what I see here is that if Democrats are able to win the generic ballot by 3 percentage points, it would allow them to expand their majority in the United States Senate and narrowly lose the majority. And when I say narrowly lose the majority, you're talking about losing 11 seats, losing 12 seats. And while, of course, they will be unhappy about that, it will not give Republicans nearly as large of an advantage as it did in 2010 or 2014, which is what I think the Democratic Party really should be focusing on. I think they should acknowledge that the House at this point in time does seem to be a cause that obviously is worth fighting for, but won't be one that will be easily won. And I think that should be recognized, and they should move on with that assumption, essentially moving into 2022, saying, what can we do to maintain as many seats as we have right now, rather than work on the offense of trying to gain seats. But of course, circumstances can change. But what I am saying essentially is that with Joe Biden being in the negative, with the polling data showing the Democrats at this point in time, I don't think they will retain control of the House of Representatives. But I do think, and I think this is something the Democratic Party will soon realize, that they can do as much damage control and as much defense as they need to, and can certainly hold on to a significant portion of their House seats and not lose it, like they did in 2010 or 2014, which my best estimation, if I was to say right now of what a House map would look like, probably the 2012 one. Now, that puts the Democrats at 201 seats and the Republicans at 233, which means that the majority here, while seemingly large, actually isn't that large and sets Democrats up for the opportunity for 2024 to reclaim the majority. Now, this is assuming we're looking at a red wave year. I honestly think that the Democrats will lose control of the House of Representatives if there is a neutral type of year Democrats simply don't have the redistricting numbers, nor do they have the excitement on their side in order to retain control. And that's what this polling data seems to suggest. It doesn't suggest a red wave year by any standard. A red wave year would mean Republicans leading in the generic ballot. Right now, Democrats are holding on by a similar Hillary Clinton type of margin, which means that Democrats could win a similar Hillary Clinton district total as they did in 2016 for 2022. So looking at the House of Representatives in 2022, looking at a lot of the election results in the past, I will say that the Democrats probably will not retain control, but can certainly do very, very well. Let's take a look at 2020, though. I think this also does deserve a bit of interest because people painted 2022 as this year in which the Democratic Party was going to be very solid in. And, I admit to that. I did think that the Democratic Party would expand their House seats for 2020, but they simply didn't. And a lot of that was due to this down ballot effect that President Trump brought to the Republican Party that benefited them in every single race. State legislatures flipped in New Hampshire and Minnesota. Democrats were falling apart in a number of races, Senate races. There were 10, 12 competitive Senate races. Democrats only won 3 of them. What happened in the Senate, what happened in the House, what happened in the state legislatures was that Democrats simply fell apart and they were unable to win in many key areas and were unable to prevent supermajorities from forming in states such as Kansas, which allows redistricting to occur in an unfortunate manner for the GOP, for the Democratic Party, meaning that they probably won't get a congressional district that they want and won't be able to block it because the Kansas Supreme Court actually does have a liberal bias there, but a lot can be, interchanged and overturned with super majorities. With a lot here, there can't be a veto from the governor because Laura Kelly might be a Democrat but has no control over a supermajority. A lot that needs to be unpacked. A lot of individual races that were lost by the Democratic Party that ultimately put them in a negative position for 2022. If you take a look at the toss-up districts here, you will see the Democrats did not win a single one. But the point is that the cards are stacked against the Democratic Party in every regard. In 2020, they lost 15 seats. In 2022, Joe Biden seems to be on track to be unpopular in time for Election Day, the same way Obama was, the same way Trump was, the same way Bush was in 2006, the same way Clinton was in his years. Looking at the approval rating of the president, typically speaking, by the time we reach that midterm, they will be unpopular. And that's why the incumbent party typically gains seats. But right now, we aren't seeing a major indication that a red wave is coming. 2018 was a blue wave. 2006 was a blue wave. 2010 and 2014 were red waves. We are not seeing this form for 2022. Maybe it's a 20-year thing that 2002 and 2022 will not be wave years, more neutral, maybe beneficial for the incumbent party. But what I think so far is that the cards are stacked against the Democratic Party in almost every regard, in a historical context, in a numbers context. But Republicans don't seem to be jumping on that opportunity or performing as well as they should be if this was a traditional year. Maybe it's COVID-19. Maybe it's a couple of other things. Maybe it's a combination of both. More likely that than anything. But what I see happening across this nation is not a red wave. If anything, it seems to be a year that Democrats won't be retaining control of the House of Representatives, but will still perform well enough that they can expand their seats in the United States Senate and do pretty well in the future in 2024 by setting up 2022 to be a year where they can understand that they will lose control of the House, but can hold on to a number of competitive districts that will be redrawn in time for 2022 that they can expand upon in 2024. Right now, the political betting markets are telling me the Republicans are going to win control of the House. I think that's true. When it comes down to the Senate, I don't necessarily think that Republicans will have this large of an advantage. I think that at this point in time, well, as it stands with Joe Biden's approval rating, yes, Republicans have that advantage, but Democrats can expand their majority in the United States Senate if things start to get up a little bit better. But again, that is entirely up to the Democratic Party and entirely up to Joe Biden to recover his approval rating here. But everything that we've seen so far, the special elections in 2021, the California recall, the Georgia Senate elections, nothing is telling us that 2022 will be a red wave. And our best indicator, the one thing that seems to be accurate in a number of elections in terms of the overall final result, is the generic ballot. And if it's telling us that Democrats still maintain this lead with Joe Biden being unpopular, and a lot of other things that seemingly would stack the cards against the Democratic Party, but they are breaking down for, surprisingly, I would say, I'm very surprised at the success the Democratic Party has had in these new generic ballot poll numbers and a number of other endeavors. But I do think that just looking at everything so far, from historical context, you might assume 2022 would be a red wave, but absolutely nothing is indicating that Republicans will have that wave here in 2022. Even them reclaiming control of the House and Senate, I will say, could be classified as a wave, but that would require Democrats to be at one of their lowest points. And I can tell you now, I do expect them to recover. And as of right now, these generic ballot numbers are defying my expectations as to what I thought would be the result with Joe Biden being in the negative. Because even when Biden was up 10 points, Democrats were only leading in the generic ballot by around 5 points. Today, with him being down 3 points, a 14-point swing from the time that I just showed you to now, only about a 2-point reduction for the Democratic Party. So it seems that Americans might be less dependent on President Biden's approval rating than we previously thought, and might have other issues in mind, such as COVID-19, that certainly were not thought about in any other midterm election year in United States history. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today. Sorry, tomorrow.